right, welcome into Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a sometimes serious, oftentimes humorous look at the claim by Jehovah's Witnesses that they are living in a modern day spiritual paradise, thanks to the faithful and discreet slave, otherwise known as the governing body in upstate New York. I am your host, Stacy Bauman, former elder, ministerial servant, and as I do and say, a kid raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the 1970s and 1980s. Warning, always like to tag it here. We try to have some fun here. We try to heal with each episode. But each episode features sarcasm, humor, my own bizarre observations and thinking. And please note, it is never meant to offend. In fact, if anything, it's my hope that some crazy thing I say here or share will get at least one person to just think about what's going on in Jehovah's Witnesses. Okay, I've said many times in this show that the most effective way to wake up a Jehovah's Witness is to encourage them to actually read the Bible and their own literature. Read it. Really read it. I struggle personally to find a balance between the absurdity of Jehovah's Witnesses and, frankly, for the most part, not in totality, but for the most part, the absurdity of the Bible itself. They're difficult for me to separate intellectually, and yet in some conversations, they should be separated. But it's a paradox. And in all honesty, as I've stated here many times, it's two different subjects, and yet they always seem to bleed together. And I'd even say, and yet they aren't two different subjects. In the last episode, I shared my observations on how Jehovah's Witnesses treat the gay community, gay people. I want to be frank here. I welcome feedback, as I always do on this show. I receive some critical messages from people saying, in a nutshell, you can't deny what the Bible says about homosexuality. And look around the world. Most Christian religions support an anti-gay agenda. You can't single out Jehovah's Witnesses as being the only cruel religion to homosexuals. I agree with all of that. It's true. And as I said at the beginning of each episode, I try to reiterate that and really show that this is a strange melding of two separate subjects, although this is a podcast and in an observation tank on Jehovah's Witnesses, so we focus there. But the negative messaging, particularly on many subjects, as an example, last week on the gay community, it's all in the magic book. It's all there. 6 places we discussed last week. But again, let's be clear. In my opinion and in my experience, there are stories in the Bible that I enjoy, and I always have. I think they're valuable, even powerful at times. They have powerful and simple messages that can help each of us be better people as we walk this planet. I personally don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, although I probably should, according to Stephen Lett, since babies are enemies of God, right? But no, listen, there are beneficial stories and parables and principles found in the Bible that can be inspiring to all of us. So I decided that for the next couple of weeks, I want to start from that platform. I want to create a series, if you will. I'm going to go back into the Bible to take a look at 3 parables or stories that have personally impacted me in a big way. Now, when I say impact, you might be thinking, well, in what way? Well, in some cases, it just got the brain firing. And the book itself, as we'll come to see, doesn't always match what the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses says. But I'm going to create 3 episodes to tackle each of these. So this week, we are going to consider parable or story number 1. And I'm going to call this series for the next 3 episodes, Story Time with the King. Because each of these stories or parables come from the New Testament, the Christian Greek scriptures, and all 3 of them were stories, and I may even add a 4th or 5th, we'll see. All of these are stories from Jesus himself. I learned these parables or stories from a young age, but found myself as an adult and elder just mesmerized by them. Whenever they came up, my mind went along for a ride. And look, some memories fade over time, but some are so distinct they feel like they were 5 minutes ago, at least to me. And two such memories surrounding this first story in Story Times with the King series. This one came up for me twice that I remember distinctly as the Watchtower study conductor, which I was privileged, at EXJW knows that word, privilege, to do for 8 years. These parables, in particular this one, came up for consideration on more than one glorious Sunday at the Kingdom Hall. And I remember doing one Watchtower study, standing on the stage thinking, how can't everyone see this? I distinctly remember one time as the paragraph was being read to my right by the Watchtower reader, I looked out as the conductor as they were all nose down in their watchtowers that Sunday, and I looked at their faces. As the reader droned on to my right on the stage, I was watching everyone else as he read information surrounding this story that we're going to tackle this week. And you might ask, what did I see? What did you see, Stacy? I saw nothing. I saw daydreaming. I saw a couple people asleep. I saw people staring at the person they had a crush on across the Kingdom Hall. I didn't see anyone intensely paying attention. And it blows my mind because the great teacher kept it simple. Keep it simple, stupid. Kiss, as the saying goes. One time I worked one of Jesus' simplest parables into a local needs talk. I often wondered if people could see through me as I gave the talk, because frankly, I'm not very good at hiding what's going on in my head. It shows up on my face pretty quickly. But as we start this series, Story Time with the King, and we tackle the first one this week, just a reminder, all of these are very, very simple parables, simple to comprehend, simple to understand, even more simple to apply. And all of them come straight from Jesus, the King of Jehovah's Witnesses. And look, I know there are many stories a person could point to in the Bible that make the governing body look really, really foolish. They look ignorant. They look brainwashed. Right about now, I'm guessing everyone is rolling their eyes because they think I'm about to go on a diatribe and dump another Noah's Ark episode on you. Or maybe Lot and his daughters. I know, those are pet stories. Come on now, though. Those two are classics. But if you want to get a quick idea how I feel about those classics, please see past episodes. I'm not going to do that here, not this week. Not to mention, I put those two treasures in the fairy tale or fable category, as I openly state. Nope, not going to tell those. No, the Story Time with the King parables feature important life-altering messages from the great teacher in a simple-to-understand format that, dare I say it, is actually kind of warm and fuzzy. They're good stories. But more importantly, with these parables, starting with this week, you come away with an easy-to-follow set of examples and principles that Jesus himself made very clear would, wait for it, identify true Christians. And for the purpose of this little podcast and discussion, these parables feature a number of qualities that you would reasonably expect to see among Jehovah's Witnesses. You would expect to see the Fine Nine in upstate New York setting the example on the principles pulled from these little stories. You would see it in droves. You would expect to see these principles, the spirit of these principles, demonstrated in everyday life, in every Kingdom Hall, in every congregation, on the street, at school, literally everywhere. They're coming from the King. Jesus made it simple for Jehovah's Witnesses, and as we will see, he was even sure to include how his guys, those leading his congregation in all of these parables, would impact the storyline. I guess Jesus thought even those guys taking the lead should listen in. Yeah, he's good like that. The guys in charge should actually demonstrate what I'm trying to teach here. Stay with me on that. Would it shock you to learn that most Jehovah's Witnesses completely ignore both? They ignore not only the story, but they ignore many and almost all of the principles. Not absolute. I want to get that out of the way now. There are many witnesses who take this seriously. There are those, usually it's the quietest person in the congregation, that apply this in everything that they do as an imperfect person. It's not a blanket. It never is. But it is the majority. And I have no problem telling you that the majority, including the guys at the top that claim they know Jesus intimately, in fact, he handpicks them and fires them, looking at you, Tony Morris, that they blatantly ignore most of what we're going to take a look at. So if you're taking inventory, Jesus takes the time to write a holy book. See that it's distributed around the world, including your local Holiday Inn. It's in the side desk. Make certain it isn't destroyed, and shares within its pages parables so basic a 5-year-old can understand the point. And well, his chosen people pay no attention to any of them or apply them in ways that are either not at all or that are totally dishonest and, well, ignorant. So here we go. After a long preamble setting the stage for Storytime with the King series, we're going to launch into our first one. And I want to say I'm not a big fan of reading the Bible for extended minutes on this little show, but I think it's powerful to take the book they claim guides every move they make and show what abject failures they are as an organization in obeying it. So join me as we take a look at what I feel is one of the most important parables in the entire Bible. I'm starting with one of my favorites. And might I add, one of the most widely ignored by 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses. Again, not everyone, but most. Parables that prove Jehovah's Witnesses aren't paying attention to what's right under their nose and are being misled by the 9 guys in upstate New York that are supposed to set the example. So follow along with me, if you will, as I read from the pages now of the New World Translation, and I seek an imaginary passing mark in the theocratic ministry school that no longer exists. Our first parable in Storytime with the King series, and might I add, there are many interpretations of this parable by many religions, but in this context, we are putting it under the Jehovah's Witness microscope. Open your Bibles, if you will, with me, friends. God, I haven't said that in a long time. To the Bible book of Luke, chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. This, you may recognize, is one of the most famous stories and parables in the Bible, otherwise known as the parable of the Good Samaritan. Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. To get the impact, I'm again going to read the verses. I feel like I'm giving the number one talk again. It says this, straight from Jesus' mouth, quote, "Now look, a man versed in the law stood up to test him and said, 'Teacher, what do I need to do to inherit everlasting life?' He said to him, 'What is written in the law? How do you read?' In answer, he said, 'You must love Jehovah your God with your whole heart and with your whole soul and with your whole strength and with your whole mind, and your neighbor as yourself.' He said to him, 'You answered correctly. Keep doing this, and you will get life.'" But wanting to prove himself righteous, the man said to Jesus, "Who really is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell victim to robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went off, leaving him half dead. Now, by coincidence, a priest was going down on that road, but when he saw him, he passed by on the opposite side. Likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the opposite side. But a certain Samaritan traveling the road came upon him, and at seeing him, he was moved with pity. So he approached him and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. Then he mounted him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, 'Take care of him, and whatever you spend besides this, I will repay you when I return.' Who of these 3 seems to you to have made himself neighbor to the man who fell victim to the robbers?" He said, "The one who acted mercifully toward him." Jesus then said to him, "Go and do the same yourself." End quote. One of my favorite stories in the Bible. From the time I was 10 to right up to the moment of turning on this microphone, I love the story. It's so simple. It cuts to the chase. It's to the point. It's got all kinds of interesting characters. So let's break it down. This powerful, I might add, parable from Jesus. And as we do on this little show, keep in mind that the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses claims that the Bible, the same one in every Holiday Inn side table, the one you can get free from the Gideons or from any church, that book was written primarily for the anointed, the 144,000. The rest of us can only enjoy it and support the faithful and discreet slave of Jehovah's Witnesses. And why do I bring this up? Because according to the governing body, this parable we just read is made for the governing body. They openly claim that everything in the Bible points to a publishing company in upstate New York, and again, primarily them, the Fine Nine. They're tasked with applying this. They're tasked with teaching this. They are tasked with living this. So let's dive into a story even a child can understand. But wow, does it expose a few things about the governing body and, frankly, about Jehovah's Witnesses. I want to note at this point again that many religions believe each of these characters represent different things. It's all open to interpretation across all kinds of Judeo-Christian religions. Some say the priest represents the law, that the Levite represents the prophets, that the Samaritan always represents Jesus. Folks, I'm here to say it doesn't matter. The message is the same. But again, as a Jehovah's Witness, it's all pointing to Jehovah's Witnesses and the governing body. Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind as we dive into this. So let's tear it apart. Note who starts the conversation. Luke tells us it's a man versed in the law who stood up to test him. Test Jesus himself. One of many details that Jehovah wanted to be sure Jehovah's Witnesses knew when he gave them the magic book known as the Bible. Someone in authority wanted some answers. Interesting. So he asked the mother of all questions. How do I live forever in heaven and toss fireballs at Armageddon? Because that was the only hope open to this man standing there in front of Jesus. The question itself seems pretty reasonable. Jesus came to save everyone and take them to heaven. Note Not a word here in this all-powerful story about a paradise earth or a secondary hope. Not there. Interesting side note, tuck it away for another day. But while the question is important, it's the answer that Jesus gives that should give every Jehovah's Witness pause. Some things to take note of that I took note of as a kid, that I couldn't shake as an adult, that would penetrate the mind that I had as an elder. There's some details in this incredibly easy to understand story that I want to call out. And if you're a Jehovah's Witness bravely listening, PMO, POMO, all the acronyms, all the whatever it might be, take this journey here for a few minutes and see, again, if you disagree, I completely respect that. Absolutely. Thank you for being here. Please stay. And I'm open to being criticized or disagreed with. But here's my observations from, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years old, all the way up to drafting local needs parts to land points home with people who just wanted something encouraging to hear at a Kingdom Hall. Here's a few. In this little story, Jesus is teaching people how to live life, how to treat other people, including giving of your resources, and most importantly, the point of the whole story is accepting people who don't believe like you believe. I can't shake that take. We're going to some detail here. He's teaching you how to treat people who you don't agree with, who don't share your belief system, who are in need, how you should view them, how you shouldn't view them. Looking at you, priest Levite guys, it's a very simple message a 5-year-old can pick up on. Another point, there's not a word in this parable about field service or preaching. In fact, if you want to send your brain into a total spin out and a subject for a future episode, if you look back in verse 7 of Luke 10, he commands his disciples to literally not transfer from house to house. Do not go house to house. What a buzzkill. That sure kills a few songs in the songbook, doesn't it? Boom. Can't sing those songs anymore, and you know the ones dancing in your brain if you've been a long-time witness or were raised as one. There's no word of field service, or literally, there's a command to not go house to house, to emphasize giving practical help in this context didn't include giving someone a Bible study as claimed by the governing body. It's not there. That's not considered helping a naked, half-dead, comatose guy in a ditch. That's not practical help. In fact, as you'll note by extension, there's not a word in this parable about a publishing company, an organization, or obedience to the governing body. Even if you want to say it was in Jerusalem, it never was. There's not a word here in this parable from the King and Savior about financial donations or about carrying a blood card or medical directive saying that this Jewish guy would rather die to remain loyal to a publishing company. Apparently the half-beaten Jewish guy had neither that he could lean on. Wild detail, huh? Seems like a pretty good spot to drop it in for those of us in the future. It seems to be missing from the story. Oddly, at least here, and again, you're getting a trip into the mind of a whacked-out ex-Jehovah's Witness elder, and frankly, this is mostly my childlike mind, because I've never shook these thoughts from the time I was a young guy to the time I was an old guy. But you'll notice here that Jesus didn't share the 2 baptism questions. What a miss, at least in my opinion. I feel like this was the story where he should have shared the 2 baptism questions. He fixed this later, let's be honest, with a publishing company in New York in the 20th century. And of course, those guys, they fixed even Jesus' original questions, as you can see throughout Watchtower history. Just minor rewrites to include dedicating your life to a publishing company. But listen, I digress. We have no idea if this Jewish guy knew any of this. Stuff that, again, the man versed in the law at the beginning of the story said, what do I need to do to get everlasting life? All of these details, including baptism questions, blood cards, and everything else, they're not there. There's nothing there. And it seemed like such a golden opportunity for Jesus to say, hey, you guys listening in might not understand this, but my dedicated followers in the 20th, 21st centuries, they're going to need to know this stuff. So I'm going to drop it right here. Nope. All very interesting details, or should I say omissions, that a Jehovah's Witness should pay very close attention to, at least in my opinion. Again, it's your book. There can be zero claims this is an apostate book, apostate literature, an evil website, or a mentally diseased person's opinion. This is a letter from Jehovah and his son Jesus to all those that want to be a Jehovah's Witness and gain everlasting life. It's worth noting from my perspective that when someone tried to trap Jesus into saying something dumb, Jesus apparently kept it very simple and just asked a couple of very simplistic leading questions. But let's dive into Jesus' answer to the smart guy that just wanted to live forever. Never mind, a side note, tuck it away in a different chamber for a different day. Never mind that the smart guy who's asking the question is an apostate. Jesus was still hanging out with him, and Jesus was even talking to him, and Jesus was even answering his questions. An apostate Jew. Shocking little detail to drop in there. But as we dive into these details, this is where this story truly exposes that the governing body and Jehovah's Witnesses are paying no attention at all. And again, I lean into the leadership side because they're the ones teaching the flock of God, so to speak. As we dig into the details on this little story, there are 5 main characters. There's the bad guys, the robbers, that are hanging out between Jerusalem and Jericho on a dirt road. There is a priest, there's a Levite, there's a Jew who takes a massive beating, and then there is a Samaritan. And in my opinion, within these 5 characters, Jesus masterfully exposes the majority of hypocrisy we see among all of today's religions. But as is the case on this show, the gross hypocrisy, the gross ignorance, and the gross disobedience among the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses. A story a 5-year-old can understand that exposes the fine 9 for who they really are. It's undeniable, at least from where I sit. But again, I'm open to disagreement. Let's break them down. The main characters in this story. The Jew. He's traveling between Jericho and Jerusalem, a notorious stretch, historically, I might add, of roadway filled with bad guys. They hung out there, they robbed people, merchants went back and forth between the two cities. They just hung out there and jumped them. So it's not likely an accident that Jesus chose that stretch for his listeners that were standing there, that were hearing this conversation, and it even applies today. Look, the world is a dangerous, often brutal place. Apparently, this Jew wasn't thinking or was overly confident or was just an innocent person trying to navigate a brutal world. He sounds a lot like, well, the rest of us, right? Just a guy minding his business, going down the road. But the devil is in the details of the story. People during this time in history were also very identifiable by their clothing and their grooming. And I'm not going to go into the Mosaic Law, into beards and all that. We don't need reminders about beard lengths or fringes on robes or hygiene or what a Jew looked like compared to the Greeks and the Romans, or even, gonna say it, even what a male penis looked like in one walk of life compared to a foreigner, okay? The fact that he was stripped naked and out cold makes Jesus' point even more powerful. It didn't matter who he was or what he was doing. It didn't matter. Keep that in mind. And also note, we know nothing about this man. Was this Jewish guy a good guy? Was he a bad guy? Was he married? Was he single? Did he have kids? Why was he alone? Who did he love? Was he a regular temple attender? Did he have a tattoo or not? Nothing. We know nothing about this Jewish man. Jesus gave us nothing on this poor guy. But folks, that is the point. It doesn't matter. Moving on to the second guys, the robbers, bad guys. Big problems, challenges, all things nasty that we might encounter in life. At least that's my application. Seems obvious. It's a dangerous world. We don't know anything about them either. We don't know what they wanted. They just beat him half to death, stripped him of his clothes, and left him in a ditch. The priest. Here is where it starts to get good, in my opinion. And it did as a kid. It was obvious to me. Someone who should be following in Jesus' footsteps, a priest. Someone who teaches others that are less knowledgeable. Someone that sets the example. Interesting to note that the priests were leaders in Israel and in Jerusalem. For example, the captain of the temple was the main chief priest, and he had priests under him who served as the temple treasurers, the temple overseers, and the priests in charge of the ordinary priests. As for these guys at this point, they sound an awful lot like, well, the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. Do I need to connect the dots? I'm going to spare you. Let's move on to the Levite. Note, it's important to note in this little story, I'm getting into my love for history and all things biblical in the past, that while all priests were Levites, not all Levites were priests. And that's the differentiator in Jesus' story. Some Levites were singers and musicians. Others were temple servants who were responsible for cleaning and maintaining the temple, and they'd help the priests put on and take off their vestments, their big costumes. Sounds an awful lot like another group and their watches on JW Broadcasting. The temple's police force was also made up of Levites. Isn't that interesting? But nonetheless, they served in the temple. As for these guys, I'm going to be honest, in my own application of this story with the king, these guys, the Levites, remind me a lot of, I don't know, circuit overseers, elders. Not a reach in my mind. They help the priests, and they have different responsibilities. Interesting. And now for the guy that we've all been waiting for, the Good Samaritan, clearly representing the storyteller, Jesus, the guy telling the story, or a person that closely follows and emulates Jesus in every walk of life, in basic application. And at the risk of turning this into a history lesson, it's incredibly important to note the context and why Jesus chose a Samaritan to land his point home with his audience. Jews, the guy beaten in the ditch, and Samaritans, the rescuer, hated each other. And they didn't just hate each other, it was vile hatred. They destroyed each other's temples. The Jews would call someone a Samaritan as an insult. In fact, at one point in the Bible, they called Jesus a Samaritan as an insult. They were trying to insult him. You know, sort of like someone calling you an apostate when you leave Jehovah's Witnesses. Sound familiar? And in case you forgot, the Jews and the Samaritans were related. In many ways, they were family. Now, again, digging into the magic book, the hatred can be traced all the way back to Joseph and his brothers. You remember, Joseph was Jacob's favorite, so his brothers got really upset about that and threw him down a well. But he comes back, as the story goes. He ends up saving all his brothers. The land gets divided, etc., etc., etc. The 12 tribes end up dividing. Typical family dynamic, I might add. The Samaritans sprang from the dividing of the 12 tribes of Israel and became the northern kingdom of Israel. They fought each other, as I might mention. They sabotaged temples. True family good times, I might add. They were cousins. Jews and Samaritans hated each other's guts, but by extension were actually family. So we must note this because it's not an accident that Jesus chose a Samaritan for his story. They hated each other, and they were family as you went backwards in time. Why is any of this important? Because in 2023, it only makes the governing body look worse. Jesus' message in this story is clear, folks. It's clear. Jehovah's Witnesses should act like the Samaritan, the one they may hate, the one that may be family, the one who doesn't believe as they do. Interesting note, wouldn't you say? We'll get into it. I am now at this point going to throw in an honorable mention sixth character in this story. I can't resist, and I'm going to call it right now, the donkey. Gotta throw in some weird. Why? Because as a kid reading the story of the Good Samaritan, I had questions. Did the Good Samaritan's donkey talk like Balaam's donkey did? And if so, why not? Why do some donkeys talk and others don't? Did the donkey know his great-great-great-grandparents were chosen likely by Noah himself? Just two of them got on a ride on the ark? I had to throw it in. I'm sorry. Yes, listen. The good old My Book of Bible Stories book in the late 70s. Damn, was I a weird kid when I think about this. But listen, the book was chronological, and I had way too much time to think while sitting at boring congregation meetings. So there you go. Honorable mention to the donkey. Even as a kid, I'd stare at the page and wonder, why doesn't he talk like Balaam's did? Does he know his great-grandparents were chosen by Noah? On and on. From the weird chambers of this guy's mind. But back to the story. When considering the details of this story, wouldn't you agree, and we read it right from the New World Translation, wouldn't you agree that we should expect to see all Jehovah's Witnesses acting just as kind, just as giving, just as open as the Samaritan? Right? Uh-oh. Oops. As I mentioned earlier, every time this parable came up for study or in a talk, my mind would drift. It would just drift. It was all so obvious to me, and not in a good way. A story that a young child could comprehend and apply seemed to be completely ignored for the most part as a Jehovah's Witness. Now, the governing body will say they live by this. Look, they're going to get up on stages, coliseums, Zoom meetings, whatever. And they're going to say that they live by this, that they practice and promote it in their teachings and in their personal examples. It's worth noting that they don't have pages and pages or books and books or constant Watchtower articles or videos on this parable. They have a few. There's some there. But they don't lean on this one very hard. And I've always wondered why. And now I think I have the answer. But they do make a few comments that only serve to further condemn them as ignorant, arrogant, and disobedient. I present to you, in light of the Good Samaritan story, Watchtower of 2018, August, pages 18 through 22, which, under the aptly titled article, Generous Givers Are Happy People, it has this little tidbit that they sneak right into an article that no one's paying attention to. Quote, "Indeed, in the parable of the neighborly Samaritan, Jesus made clear that he expected his followers to go out of their way to help others, even those of a different background. End quote. They don't provide much detail here, but anyone whose brain cells are firing ends up with a few questions. And I want to repeat what they themselves just said here on billions of pages of Watchtower. Quote, Jesus made clear that he expects his followers to go out of their way to help others, even those of different backgrounds. Are your brain cells firing here? Do you know where we're going? Let's consider a few questions regarding this claim from 2018, including their apparent lack of basic reading comprehension skills and whether or not they themselves apply this easy-to-follow parable to how they shepherd the flock of God. Remember, Jesus looked throughout the entire universe and thought these guys, these 9, were the best ones to represent him and the Good Samaritan. We should easily be able to correlate them to the parable. Wouldn't you agree? From the Watchtower of 1998, July 1st, pages 30 through 31, under the article, Samaritan Proves to be a Good Neighbor. The governing body says this, quote, Jesus' parable shows that a truly upright person is one who not only obeys God's laws, but also imitates his qualities. For example, the Bible tells us that God is not partial. Do we imitate God in this regard? Jesus' stirring parable shows that our neighborliness should transcend national, cultural, and wait for it, religious barriers. Really, Christians are instructed to work what is good toward all, not just toward people of the same social class, race, or nation, and wait for it, not just toward fellow believers. End quote. Take a breath. I'm going to. Maybe a quick sip of coffee. Where are my fellow mentally diseased apostates or disfellowshipped people right now who simply didn't want to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses any longer, therefore falling into the bucket of those with religious differences and not just a fellow believer? What? Just let the cognitive dissonance bleed through. The entire point of this parable is that religious leaders from Jehovah's chosen nation at that time, sound familiar, ignored a guy laying naked in a ditch. They just ignored him. But they didn't just ignore him. They were so disgusted by him, wait for it, they passed by on the opposite side of the road. They ignored him. Dare I say, they shunned him. They didn't just ignore someone who was in a life or death circumstance. They crossed the street to get as far away from him as possible. Jesus, care to comment? Because the guys you have running your earthly organization don't seem to understand this story that a 5-year-old can comprehend. They don't seem to understand this detail. Today, Jehovah's Witnesses are regularly reminded to treat anyone that disagrees with their religion, read The 9 Guys in Upstate New York, that they will soon be bird food. They will be the naked guy, the Jew in the ditch, but they're just going to let him die. In fact, they're going to help him die, that they're detestable, that they're hated. And everyone is commanded to shun them, including members of their own family. do I need to reference the Jew Samaritan connection? But something doesn't add up. Because as you read the story right from the magic book, whether you're 5 years old or 50 years old, it's easy to see that Jesus seems appalled by such conduct and indicates that you not only miss out on everlasting life if you treat people this way, but you also would certainly not be one of his chosen kings. Again, a story a child can understand. The principles outlined here by Jesus himself. And yeah, they try to distort this to the children in the audience that they hope will be the next generation of Jehovah's Witnesses. As you know, I always lean into what they're teaching children in every episode. So here we go. Remember this story that we just read. Remember all the details. In their book, Lessons from the Great Teacher, A Lesson in Being Kind. Note, the governing body tries to apply this to not being racist, which, by the way, is a powerful and much-needed message, but it completely ignores the impact of Jesus' story. That is certainly one application, I guess, you could reach for in this story, but they completely gloss over to children, to baby brains, the bigger lesson, which is this: be kind to everyone, including those that aren't Jehovah's Witnesses, including those that don't agree with you, including those that might have been a Jehovah's Witness, but no longer are. They're still nice. Dare I say the obvious? Even those that have left Jehovah's Witnesses, just like the Samaritans left the 12-tribe kingdom of Israel. It's all right in the story. Today, the same people in 2023 that we know like a good birthday cake, they might take a blood transfusion in a pinch and decided they just don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness anymore. But back to the book. I'm sorry, I got fired up. The book says this in the quote. It misses all the points I just rambled on about. It says, quote, "So if you see someone hurt, what will you do? What if the person is from a different country or his skin color is different from yours? He is still your neighbor and you should help him. If you feel too small to help, then you can ask an older person for help, or you can call a policeman or a school teacher. That is being kind, like the Samaritan man. The great teacher wants us to be kind. He wants us to help others, no matter who they may be." Really? I got some questions. That is why he told the story about the kind Samaritan. And then, end quote, and then the book features a story, a cute illustration of a cute little white girl bandaging the knee of a cute little dark-skinned girl on some steps. Look, that's a great message. That isn't the message that Jesus was trying to get across. Jesus doesn't mention anything about racism in here. He calls out the fact that they come from different walks of life, but the power of the story is not in what they're trying to teach children. They don't mention in the Great Teacher book, as it were, that you should honor people of different religions. You should be kind to those that have left the kingdom hall. Nope. What it does not show is a set of parents rejecting their teenager for life because they don't agree with the priest and the Levite. Oops, sorry. Scratch that. I meant to say the governing body. Sarcasm is mine. In true governing body fashion, they skirt the bigger reason for the entire parable: being kind to everyone, no matter their background or their beliefs. But it's deeper than even that. In this incredible story that I've been mining in my brain for decades. Let's drill down some more. The point their king and brother was apparently trying to make was that they should go beyond the call of duty to be kind to others. There's so much in this story. There's so much in this story, which is why I still love this story. But Jesus is saying, go beyond the call of duty. Let's review and compare the Good Samaritan's actions in the story to those of the modern day governing body. And by extension, oftentimes other Jehovah's Witnesses. It pains me to say that. And you tell me if this doesn't reek of ignorance and disobedience. Factoid 1. The Samaritan doesn't hesitate to render aid to someone who was another religion or an apostate, possibly even family. Do I need to point out the irony here? You can see past episodes on this little show on how they claim apostates should be killed, how they can't wait to kill us, their eager anticipation to destroy anyone that disagrees with them, even blowing out matches on camera and giggling about it with a laugh track pounding in the background. But ain't in the story, folks. The story says the complete opposite. And it came from the guy they claim is their king. If you're uncomfortable right now and you're a witness who's bravely stayed this long, I understand. The story doesn't teach this. It teaches the opposite. That's the whole point of the story. As a reminder, the governing body says the following about those that no longer want to be a Jehovah's Witness, much like a Jew versus a Samaritan, from the now famous Watchtower article that I love to roll out just as reminders, Watchtower 2011, July 15th, page 11, in the simplified version on their website. Quote, the Bible says that apostates are mentally diseased and that they use their teachings to make others think like them. Jehovah is like the good doctor. He clearly tells us to stay away from these false teachers. We must always be determined to follow this warning. What must we do to avoid false teachers? We do not speak to them or invite them into our houses. We also do not read their books, watch them on television, read what they write on the internet, or add our own comments about what they write on the internet. End quote. This counsel is in direct conflict with King Jesus' story. Make no bones about it. And it continues, the Watchtower of 1992, July 15th, pages 12 through 13, Christ hated lawlessness, do you? It has this to say, quote, the obligation to hate lawlessness also applies to all activity by apostates. Our attitude toward apostates should be that of David, who declared, do I not hate those who are intensely hating you? End quote. Please note that according to this inspired counsel from the governing body that seems to be in direct conflict with the story of the Good Samaritan, also means that not helping them if you find them naked in a ditch, recently beaten and robbed, you are not to help them. You're commanded to pass by on the other side of the road. See priest and Levite. And if you don't do that, you don't obey us, we will treat you like the guy laying there in the ditch, beaten, naked, and almost dead. Again, why are you to ignore him, hate him, and hope he dies? Because, well, he disagreed with the priest and the Levite. Oh, sorry, I got that confused. He disagreed with the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. You simply can't make this stuff up. It's right there in one of the easiest to understand stories in the entire Bible. It comes from Jesus himself. But we're not done. Who do you personally, as you read this story, compare the priest and the Levite to in modern times? Wink, wink. Details from the story, maybe factoid 2. The Samaritan was invested in the man, laying there naked and dying, the Jew, who didn't share his religious beliefs, who he believed was an apostate. Did you notice in verse 34 of this little story the following details? This man, and this goes to the practicality of rendering aid or being kind to those that, as Jesus said, don't agree with you. Sometimes I'm worn out. Did you notice some of these details about the Samaritan toward the Jew? He had to lift a comatose human male onto his donkey by himself, according to the story. Ever tried to do that? Ever tried to just drag one of your kids who's throwing a temper tantrum and how heavy they are, much less a grown adult? Another note from this incredibly powerful story: he was likely a traveling merchant, and he used his oil and wine to administer aid. He used his stuff, and he did it with no one watching. No videos, no website, no magazine experiences. You know, the ones I'm talking about from the Watchtower. Young Samaritan guy from Samaritan City had this to say. Nope, just him. Often overlooked in verse 35 of this story in Luke 10, did you happen to notice and give some thought to the fact that he spent the night with the beaten man? He didn't just drag him to the inn or a hospital or a doctor and then leave. He spent the first night with him. It goes on to tell us that he spent his hard-earned money on a stranger. 2 denarii. That was 2 full days' wages in those times, to give context. He gave practical help on the spot. He didn't waver. He just gave practical help to someone who needed it, and the someone was someone that he could potentially hate, someone that didn't agree with his belief system, someone that may have decided not to be a Jehovah's Witness. He gave practical help. He stayed the night with him. He gave his money to him. Oh, trust me, I'm going to get to how that compares. And one of my favorite things is he didn't just say, "Hey, buddy, hang in there." Or maybe my favorite, lean over his crumpled body and say, "Hey, just wait on Jehovah." He just jumped to action. He rendered aid without judgment. He had no idea if the man deserved the beating. He had no idea if the man was crazy. Did the beaten guy have doubts? Did the beaten Jew in the ditch have an average of 10 hours of field service a month? Did he donate money to the local congregation? None of that matters. None of that mattered in the story of the Good Samaritan. He paid the innkeeper out of his own pocket, and he did this without asking anybody else for money or even making a single guest appearance on Jehovah's Witness broadcasting. He didn't even pump a website. I'm guessing you can see where this is going. Aside from the painfully obvious fact that the governing body's begging for money is on the increase, see recent JW broadcasting episodes where they'll accept anything, including coconuts. What? Yeah, true story. They also don't use any of their finances to help people in need. Nothing. For a JW that takes umbrage with that, sure, there's an occasional time where they go into a local community and after helping their own people, they let some other people have some water or some sand or whatever the case may be. I'm not minimizing that kindness, but let's be honest here. Let's not be disingenuous. Jehovah's Witnesses and the governing body do not give their financial means or buckets of money. And again, there are lots of singular people that do to their neighbor, to the kid down the street. I'm not picking on every single soul. I'm talking about as an organization. They most definitely do not do this. They don't do this. And look, I challenge you. I don't know if someone disagrees with that comment, but if you do and you think I'm being harsh, give this a shot. Show up dirty, half beaten to death, half naked, asking for some food or some help to the following address: 900 Red Mills Road, Wallkill, New York, 12589 in the United States. Give it a shot. Let us all know if someone races out to meet you and they offer you a room, some food, some clean clothes. They even provide health care. But be prepared. What's really going to happen is they're going to ask you to leave and they're going to call the local police department. The story's so simple. They never offer their finances, their financial means. They don't do it. Don't. But according to them, they offer something even more valuable, not pictured in Jesus' story, oddly enough. From the Awake of 1973, November 22nd, pages 24 through 26, under the article, Is It Always Wise to Give to Charity? Quote, and of course, those who are Christian ministers are in position to give something far better than silver and gold, or anything the Good Samaritan was doing. That was from me. Back to quote, and what is that? The truth of God's word, which brings comfort, hope, peace of mind, and which can even result in life eternal. End quote. Did you pick up on the words? They're always in every article and every quote. It can even result in life eternal. There's always a disclaimer. Also, no disclaimers in the story of the Good Samaritan. Isn't it odd? So if you're paying attention, we don't give money. We don't act like the Good Samaritan. We don't render health care. We don't give them a place to stay. We don't feed them, protect them from the elements. We offer them a Bible study. And by the way, it can result in your very own kangaroo in paradise. Also not mentioned in Jesus' story, but the emphasis here is really on the word can. There's always a few stipulations. You'll note that in the story of the Good Samaritan, Jesus just didn't offer any stipulations. Imagine how different Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan would look with the following ending. All according to the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. It looks something like this. There's a road between Jericho and Jerusalem. There's a man. He's naked. He's been beaten by some criminals. He's near death. The Samaritan and his donkey stumble upon him. The Samaritan gets off his donkey. He can't believe what he's discovered. He crouches over the crumpled body of the naked, comatose Jew, the apostate who he hates, his donkey looking on a few feet away. And she watches the priest and she watches the priest and the Levite wandering down the road in the distance. But the Samaritan leans over the body and he whispers, "Hey, bud, looks like you're in some rough shape. You're bleeding, you're dehydrated. I can't tell if you have a heartbeat. But hey, do you feel up for studying the Bible and this little 192-page book with me? It shows you how you can live forever one day on a paradise earth. Hey, he's shaking the body. Answer me. Hey. He's being disrespectful. He then reaches into his bag on the donkey, pulls out a little tract and throws the tract on the man's face, and he rides away. Mounts the donkey and moves on down the road. Folks, if you think that's sarcasm, it is. But if you think that isn't exactly what the governing body does in ignorance of this powerful story, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. Because in their minds, that's the value they have to add. And they want us to believe that Jesus from the sky seats has told them to act this way. One more reference to the modern-day Good Samaritans in New York and their thoughts on using money. And again, I'm kind of picking on the one detail in this story to help other people. From the Awake of June 8th, pages 26 through 27, under charitable contributions, a Christian obligation? That's a question. Quote, religion is not alone in zealously pushing the emotional buttons of contributors and then pocketing most of the money. It's not unusual for some fundraisers to keep more than 90% of the donations they solicit. You don't say, fine 9. Wait a minute, people donate and the leaders keep 90% of it? Those evil false religious leaders. So for the rest of us, including your 8 million Jehovah's Witness publishers, what percentage of the money do you take in? And how much of that goes directly back to someone in need? Surely you're not keeping 90% or more from the organization, are you? Right there in print. There you have it. There you have it. The governing body's application of the Good Samaritan. Just a few details, and there are many more. But as we move to conclusion on this story, for those of us that don't seem to be picking up what Jesus is putting down in this very ultra simple story, he really, really makes the point and lands it home in verses 36 and 37 of Luke 10. He says this, quote, in a comparison of the priest, the Levite, and the Good Samaritan, quote, who of these three seems to you to have made himself neighbor to the man who fell victim to the robbers? The smart guy who asked the question says, the one who acted mercifully toward him. Jesus then says to him, quote, go and do the same yourself. End quote. What a powerful story. And it's a story that if you're being really honest with yourself, from the book that a Jehovah's Witness claims comes from God himself, from his very own finger by Holy Spirit, completely exposes the insanity surrounding the actions of Jehovah's Witnesses, and most especially the governing body, around people in this world, most especially those that don't agree with them, those that are in need, those that just should be treated kindly. As a kid, and at one point as an elder, standing there on the stage while the Watchtower was being read, my mind went there. My mind went there. This is a distinct memory I'm going to share, believe it or not. My mind went there. I thought, wouldn't it be great to sit the governing body down, read this parable, and ask them that same question? Who of these three seems to you to have made himself a neighbor to the man? Am I the only one that would thoroughly enjoy watching those 9 idiots squirm? A child hearing this within earshot could answer that question. The same one this smartass posed to Jesus. But what would the fine 9 do when confronted with something so basic that came right from the guy they claim gives them, and only them, direction daily? What would they do? It's one of my favorite chapters and stories in the entire Bible. I could go on for another 30 minutes, but I won't. It's so simple that a child could understand it. It's so simple and powerful, I still enjoy it. Only now do I marvel at how they stay away from this story almost entirely. I kind of suspected it then, but I watch it a lot now. When they roll out an application with this powerful story, they say it's about racism. They say it's about being nice to your next door neighbor and mowing his lawn. In my mind, and as I left, I remember thinking, I guess they simply can't make a Samaritan overlap. Or Jesus just hasn't given them any new light on this story he shared centuries ago. There is simply nowhere for a Jehovah's Witness or the governing body to go with this parable. It's simple. If you want to be like Jesus and loved by his Father Jehovah, and if you want everlasting life, you treat anyone and everyone, including those that don't agree with you, like an apostate relative, or someone who just doesn't want to believe what you believe, or someone who from a different country, or someone in need that's in desperate need of care and love. You treat any of those people like the Good Samaritan treated his apostate cousin, the Jew. You can read that story 1,000,000 times, and it just gets easier and easier and easier to understand. And sure, if you're like me as a kid, elder, and a former Watchtower study conductor, it raises a few questions. That story raises a few questions when compared with modern day Jehovah's Witnesses and the governing body. Questions like, has Jesus changed? Would Jesus go back and erase this story if he could? Because he really likes shunning people now. Why does he want millions to shun others, judge others, and walk right by those that don't share the same views and then watch them die, for some even participate in helping them die? Would Jesus change the story to the Good Samaritan asking the comatose naked Jew if he just wanted a Bible study? If Jesus told the story today, would he replace the donkey with a book cart? Did Jesus leave out some details? Maybe he forgot a judicial meeting or two with the Jewish guy? The questions just go on and on. They just go on and on in light of this powerful, simple story of the Good Samaritan. Or maybe there's just one question. Just one. In the story of the Good Samaritan, just a guy and his donkey, who is it that represents the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses? I'm going to let you answer that. Thanks for joining me this week. Appreciate the feedback. Appreciate all of you taking the time to listen. Wherever you may be well, and we'll see you next week.